Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis. I'm Tim Priester with John Brice of Football Scoop and Irish Illustrated. It's a two-man booth today. Notre Dame just completed its seventh practice of the spring inside, of course. It's a sleety, snowy, lousy day here in South Bend, which is pretty typical of early April. But, John, good news, and I think we are all a little bit surprised. I think Notre Dame fans will be a little bit surprised to hear that that Riley Leonard, Notre Dame's transfer quarterback from Duke, who of course we know had recent surgery on the ankle that was giving him problems. He's not full go. He's still in a boot. He's still over there on the sideline, sometimes pedaling on the bike. But he was a lot more active today with the quarterbacks, threw the football a little bit. And he just, seeing him on the stationary bike, he was up off the seat pedaling away. So he's doing pretty well from the surgery, from the recent surgery on his right ankle.
Yeah, and I would say that this element of his recovery lends credence to what we've all heard about Riley Leonard as we've researched him and written stories about him in the last several months, and that is he's a really good athlete. He's a really determined young man. And I think we're seeing that evidenced in how quickly he's back out on the football field. I'm like you, TP. I first noticed him on the stationary bike this morning. And again, we saw him out at practice last week on crutches. Now today he's out on the stationary bike. And to your point, he was up out of his seat getting after it, really testing his leg, not a gradual lazy pedal like I would be guilty of. He was intense and he was into it. And then I noted this, or we noted this in our staff reported offensive practice notebook, and that is he had two really strong passes, particularly that I noticed today. He had an over-the-shoulder throw down the right sideline that Jaden Harrison made a brilliant adjustment on and hauled in. And then the last pass I think any of us saw as we departed the open portion to media, he really rifled about a 30-yard sideline out to Jaden Greathouse. And he's not able to fully step into the throws, but both of those throws, the Greathouse throw required more velocity. The Harrison throw required more touch. They were both really good throws and obviously really encouraging, and especially, as noted, to have only had two scholarship quarterbacks at practice last Wednesday. A week later, they have four scholarship guys out there, and all four did various levels of work.
John, of course, handled the offensive end of the practice reports today. Drew Mentok was on the defensive side. Drew will be joining John and I for Thursday's Irish Illustrated Insider. I got too many names. I can't keep them straight for our podcast on Thursday. But before we get to some of the stuff that Drew observed, Eli Raridan, I actually didn't see this because I was kind of covering a little bit of everything. It sounded like Eli Raridan did a little bit more today than we've seen.
He did, TP, and you just have all these things to remember because you're a Renaissance man. But I thought that Eli Raridan looked good out there today. He was more active in the tight end blocking drills. He was more active in some of the throw drills, and it just seemed like there was a comfortability and a trust there that he felt with his body. And I watched a lot of those drills today, and particularly Eli just being as active as he was. And then Cooper Flanagan stood out to me a lot. I think he's had a really good spring. I'll be interested when we talk with coordinators this weekend to hear if Mike Denbrock agrees with me. But from what we've seen, I think that Cooper Flanagan's had a very nice, very solid spring, TP.
And so with Riley Leonard out there, we saw all four quarterbacks, him and Steve Angeli. I saw a really nice rolling to his right throw. I continue to really be impressed with the way that he's throwing the football. Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr, of course. Some might say that Notre Dame had a fifth quarterback out there today, or one that may end up being at Notre Dame fairly soon. Brady Hart, who was a little bit more size than I anticipated seeing him in person. Now we were up top looking down, so I didn't get a real accurate look at him, but he was standing out there with Chad Bowden. You were the one that you commented on that, John, in your offensive practice report.
Yeah, he looked really good in for a crucial visit for Notre Dame, the very highly regarded 2026 quarterback that Notre Dame has prioritized. And big visit for him. He was out there very involved, very attentive. He was right there shadowing the quarterbacks through every drill that was open to the media, and he was flanked by Notre Dame general manager Chad Bowden, who continues to do really great work for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail. And Notre Dame would like a little bit of weather for some of these guys coming in than literally sleet and snow that we dealt with early this morning. But I was impressed by his physique. You noticed it. He's not just tall. He's got some frame to him. He's got some muscle mass and some upper body development already. And then sometimes these guys come and they just walk the sidelines and they talk more than they're engaged. But he was absolutely engaged in the quarterback drills today. Not in the way in any means. I don't want to imply that. But even as the quarterbacks finished the station and began to run toward midfield for another set, he and Bowden jogged right along with them to make sure that they were ready for the next practice session.
Yeah, he definitely looked like he was engaged, and I noticed the coach that was talking up the quarterbacks, especially, I think it was especially Riley Leonard during one period. I wasn't familiar with him. You referenced him, John, in the practice report. Kurt Rowling, a former Yale quarterback. What can you tell us about him as a grad assistant?
Yeah, Kurt Rawlings, he got there maybe I want to say April of last year. He's coming on right at about a year, but really highly regarded. People in the coaching industry alerted me to him a while back as being just a really sharp guy that played at a high level at Yale. I think he was maybe a team captain, won some honors for Yale when he was playing there, and just a really cerebral guy. He's a young guy. He only finished his playing career, I want to say, 5 years ago at most. And so he's not been in it long, but he's not been out of it long. And I think that helps him. And he really had some nice work through mental reps and just putting Riley Leonard through the paces. Particularly, you noticed Angeli's really nice rollout throw. And I watched that drill. It's always a fun drill to watch the footwork and then also see how they deliver. That was a drill that Riley Leonard obviously was held out of. But during that time, he nonetheless worked on taking a snap from center or doing a mental rep snap from center, planting his foot, making the fake handoff, the play action handoff, and then spinning around. He couldn't roll out and execute, but he still got those mental reps. And I thought that was, again, some quality coaching and some quality work by Riley Leonard.
Where I was stationed up top, I was a little bit more, I saw a little bit more of the defensive side of the ball and a bunch of special teams. And I do want to talk about special teams here in a bit, but I want to point this out because I offered a very strong critique of Jordan Clark when I saw his Arizona State film, particularly from this past season. And I was told that he was banged up, so that was not an accurate indication of what he could do. Again, I mentioned this last week, I believe. I really like what I'm seeing of Jordan Clark's, not so much in team stuff, but just individual stuff. At one point, he was lined up to explain it best, like somewhat of an inside linebacker, outside linebacker, in the box kind of guy, and he did that at Arizona State. And I just like he's really showing that there's Jordan Clark. He's really showing that he's very light on his feet. We can see him moving here on special teams. I think that's a really good sign because I was a little bit, when I saw his Arizona State film, I'm like, is this really what Notre Dame's getting? But obviously he was not at 100% at that time. And I've really liked what I've seen of him. Al Golden was working specifically at one point when I was watching with the back eight, and it was a lot of rotation. How do they rotate based upon, motion from the offense, reactions to the motion, positioning. And for the most part, Al Golden was very complimentary of the guys that were involved. We saw the usual suspects, so to speak. Kaiser and Drake Bowen were predominantly the two inside guys. We saw a lot of movement with the safeties of Don Schuler, who we continue to like. Luke Tellich right there in our video. So that it was good to see that, that kind of communication. And this is a big reason why we think that Notre Dame's defense is going to be really good. Number one, they've got a bunch of good players coming back, including some veterans that they thought they might not have: Kaiser, Watts, Mills, and Cross. Although we don't see Mills and Cross much because they don't really have anything to prove this spring. But in addition to that veteran nature of that defense, just the line of communication with Al Golden. So I think that continues to be very encouraging. John, did you see the special team stuff, or were you
I did.
Totally.
No, I've got some special teams notes here,
Let's
and
go ahead and
I
chime in on it.
didn't get to do a lot of uh, scouting on the defense today. But to your point about Al Golden, I liked one thing specifically he said to the guys when he was getting them really dialed in when he was working with that back eight, and he was like, he said, "Guys, this is the big time here. Act like it." And I really liked the message that he reiterated it a couple of times, but he just made it clear that hey, this is Notre Dame. This is big. Get engaged, act like it. I thought the coaches today were particularly intense. We heard Marcus Freeman in the huddle getting after guys. Marcus Freeman absolutely getting after a couple of the punters after some punts that weren't as consistent as he wanted, barking at them really aggressively. Some of those words that we've seen bleeped out on videos before. So he was very engaged. I continue. You asked me about special teams. TP. I tried to watch the long snappers a bit more closely today. We saw all three of those guys getting work: Andrew Cross and Reno Montefort, and then the young man who just arrived in January. I continue to be impressed with Jaden Greathouse on punt return. TP. We've seen it a lot. We saw it a bit more today as Notre Dame not only worked their punt coverage unit, but had Jaden Greathouse back there returning punts against that unit. He just looks good. We saw some, I think, Jeremiah Love back there as well as Jabron Payne. But I've noticed Jaden Greathouse now 2 or 3 times on the special teams punt return element.
Yeah, I'm glad you comment on that because I agree with. I mean, Greathouse. I've liked everything I've seen of Greathouse this spring. We had a chance to interview him among others, and I mentioned to him about being faster and quicker this spring, and he smiled about it. It was like, well, I always thought I was pretty fast and quick. And I said, no, I'm not saying that you weren't. I'm just saying I think there's a little bit more skipping a step. And he did talk about that. Lauren Lando, I think, has assisted him in that respect. And you're right, John. He was back there with Jabron Payne. Jordan Faison was out there, but not in uniform. But he was back there with the punt returners. We know he'll be in the mix. I would imagine Greathouse and him are going to be the top 2 candidates for the job, but Jabron Payne and Jadarian Price, we've seen obviously very capable as a return man. Jaden Mickey as well, KK Smith among those groups. But what the part I wanted to comment on with regard to special teams was who are the gunners, who are the guys that are working, the speed guys on the edges that are working, and we kind of got an idea as to. And it's really not a surprise who some of the core guys will be because you get a lot of defensive backs and linebackers involved in that. But the guys that I noticed working as gunners, so those are the ones on the outside that are going to get downfield and cover a punt. Jordan Clark was on that group. Chance Tucker was in that group. These are defensive players. Ben Minnick, Micah Bell, who I'm a little concerned about whether he can hold up strength wise. And John, we're going to talk about the one-on-ones that we saw early in the practice, but I think he still has a ways to go. Not surprising. Micah just is going to need a little bit more time to add some bulk to that frame. So Micah Bell's in there as well. Christian Gray is just such an impressive athlete. We know he's going to be on coverage teams. And then, of course, Devin Ford, who's been moved to the safety position, but essentially to be a core team, special teams player. A couple offensive guys as gunners. Chris Mitchell, because of his speed. Cam Williams was out there. And Jeremiah Love, we know he's going to be one of the 2 top backs, but it's really enticing to have him coming off the edge and getting downfield because we know he's a very fast football player. Some of the other, who's the core guys? Some of the other core guys, I think I mainly mentioned them. That Kennedy Urlacher was, of course, working out there. I pretty much mentioned the Don Schuler. These are DBs. These are really, really good athletes that you want on your core special teams. And so we saw a lot of that. And I just wanted to name a few of those guys because you can expect. But when we get to the fall, those are a lot of the names that are going to be on Notre Dame's coverage teams.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, TP. That was in my notes. Just I was struck by the speed and the speedy players, the volume of speedy players that were out there working on Notre Dame's punt coverage unit, as we saw Marcus Freeman also very involved in that unit. But you referenced a couple of them, especially Jordan Clark. I saw Jaden Asbury getting downfield really quick in some punt coverage. And I also saw Jalen Sneed. And then you see Drake Bowen in there. It looked like maybe Jason Onye and Davis Sherwood were the two primary shields when I was watching what appeared to be the first team punt unit. But again, and even saw some Jack Kaiser out there with some of those coverage units. So I was just really impressed. Notre Dame's maybe had a couple of fast guys on coverage teams, but there's just a much greater depth of volume of speedy players and athletically gifted players for their coverage units than what we've seen perhaps in the past. And we've heard every coach talk about it from Brian Mason to Marty Biaggi to other guys on staff. Marcus Freeman preaches special teams. He cites the importance of it. He's very involved in it. And I think when you see some of the players we saw in punt coverage today, it's lending absolute substance to Marcus Freeman's words about the importance of special teams.
Not surprising that Davis Sherwood and Jason Onye would be the protectors for the punter. They were, I don't know if they were the entire season last year, but for the most part, I know Onye was out there and Sherwood was as well. So again, another veteran aspect of it's not defense, but when you're covering kicks, it is part of your defense, so to speak, or it precedes the defense before they get out there. A couple of those one-on-ones, we can wrap up here, John, with this, but a couple of those one-on-one battles that we saw that Marcus Freeman started practice with, they have the inverted trash can that they put the football on. The offensive player grabs it and can go left or right of the large trash can, and then you have some pretty serious contact there. And you mentioned Jaden Osbury. I think he showed up on that again. Kingston Viliamuasa definitely showed up in that area. I think I'm the only guy that talks about Preston Zinter, but I like him. The problem is he's got a lot of football players to contend with at linebacker, so it's going to be hard for him to get on the field. But it seems to me every time I spot him or look for him, he's doing something positive and physical, and that's a good sign. And I think you mentioned Jeremiah Love in this drill in your practice report.
Yeah, I think I saw Love. I think I saw Love take a ball and have some good leg drive. I know I saw Jaden Greathouse. When we watched that TP, I definitely felt like overall that the defensive players stood out more in those drills and those close confined, really physical thud drills that showcase will and a lot of leg drive. Greathouse and I believe it was Love were the two really offensively that I noticed. I noticed that Don Schuler. You referenced Zinter, and then I really noticed Jaden Osbury really plug the gap and stand a guy up and drive him backwards. It was an emphatic play. We've been high on Osbury for a long time, and I know some people are worried about us overhyping him. The guy just continues to improve, and now we can continue to see more and more development to his physical frame, and he's playing with a much improved frame, and he's always had really good football IQ.
I will mention one more offensive player, and he has stood out in my mind the couple times we've seen him, and it's a guy that we've been, pretty brutally honest about along the way. But Deion Colsey, I thought he was physical in that drill as well, and then we heard some good things from receivers coach Mike Brown regarding Colsey. So it is a speaking of Mike Brown. I mean, I asked him in lieu of Tim O'Malley being on hand, I asked him about how many receivers he wanted ready for the rotation. And he said 6. And
he kept it down.
If O'Malley had been there, he would have jumped up and said 6 isn't enough. But he wasn't there, so I said 6 isn't enough, is it? And he said, yeah, 6 or 7. But we know that there's attrition due to injuries there. But it is a really, really that you want to talk about a competitive 6 spots. It is going to be an extremely competitive top 6 spots, and there will be more that play just because of as we say, attrition through injury. But
for sure, but he was adamant. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
No, he
was adamant that he's coached through seasons where they've only played basically only had a 6-man rotation at the receiver spot, and he sort of made it clear that that's the preference. He kind of wants 6 guys to separate themselves, and noted that there would be 7 and 8 that would be viable contenders for playing time as well, which is a good thing. A year ago, if you had a if you had eligibility and a pulse, you could have been Notre Dame's number 4, number 5 wide receiver. But now there's competition for the 7 and 8 spots, and they're not even at full tilt with Jordan Faison not really practicing and the wait for Bo Collins to get there. So dramatic overhaul of that room. Interesting to hear him talk, but he made it clear he likes, or his preference is, a 6-man rotation.
So let's say, okay, 6 guys. Who do we know is going to be in that rotation? We know that Jordan Faison will. We know that Jaden Thomas will. We know that Jaden Greathouse will. We know that
Jaden
Harrison and Chris Mitchell.
Yeah.
That's 5.
Yeah.
And healthy Bo Collins almost undoubtedly is in that 6-man rotation. But we haven't mentioned Colsey yet. We haven't mentioned Micah Gilbert, who I love. We haven't mentioned Cam Williams, who I know a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear this, or they want to hear that. I think Cam Williams redshirts this year, barring a massive amount of injuries. I think it's just part of his growth. Right. KK Smith, I don't think makes that top 6. So it's going to be really competitive. It's going to be fun to watch that. We'll continue to report on that. We're going to be back tomorrow with our Irish Illustrated Insider podcast, and that'll be John Brice. It'll be Drew Mentok and myself, and we'll go into some of this stuff and a little bit more that we saw on the practice field today. Notre Dame has 7 spring practices in a book, 8 to go, culminating with the April 20 Blue Gold game. Until tomorrow, this has been Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis.